All right, here we go. Episode 10, recording right now. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Independent Artist. I am Nick Albanese. I'm recording this on Anchor.fm. Like I always say, it's very easy, it's fun, and it's free. So if you want to do a podcast, check it out, Anchor.fm. I left off last week. I was driving limousine, and I told you my Emeril Lagasse story. Now, about a year, close to a year later, it was 2004, still driving limo. I drove limo for a while, and I picked up, and it was May, I believe, of 2004, I picked up the one and only, the legend, comedy legend, George Carlin. That's right. I couldn't believe it. At the time, where the cars were stored was separate from the office, two different towns, and they would fax over work of who you would be picking up and where they were going, all the information. And I got a fax, and it said George Carlin, pick up at the private airport going to PPAC, which is the Providence Performing Arts Center. And I was like, is this real? They pull on my leg. I call the office, and like, yeah. The dispatcher's like, it's George Carlin. And he's like, you're welcome. Because he knew I was into acting and writing and entertainment, so it would be cool to meet George Carlin. And it's funny, the weekend before the movie came out, opening weekend of Jersey Girl, where George Carlin played Ben Affleck's father. And if you've seen that movie, he did a really, really good job. Actually, George Carlin did a really great acting job as the father. And so I go down to the limousine. It's like maybe a 6-passenger limo. I go to the private airport in Warwick, Rhode Island, Green Airport. There's a private airport there, and I'm waiting. And they arrive in their plane, and I pick him up, George Carlin. He's very nice. Hey, how you doing? And his manager, longtime manager, I think friend since high school, a guy named Jerry Hamza. I think I'm pronouncing it right. And his opening act was there, Dennis Blair. And Dennis Blair was actually, maybe for close to a decade, George Carlin's opening act. And he actually co-wrote Easy Money with Rodney Dangerfield. So I had some powerhouse guys with me. And I believe Dennis Blair's fiance or girlfriend was with them as well. So we get in the car, and I head over to the PPAC, and they all get out of the car except George. George Carlin stays in the car, and he says, I got a room at the Westin. So they all get out. They go inside the PPAC, and then I bring George over to the hotel. And I guess he just had the room to, freshen up, take a shower. And I wait outside for him. And then when he comes back, he didn't want me opening doors for him or anything. He's like, no, don't worry, just I'll open the door. And, he was just a regular guy. He was a really cool guy. And he gets in, and I say, hey, by the way, it's funny I'm picking you up today. I just saw the film just this past weekend, Jersey Girl. And you did a great job. You did a great acting job. Just want to let you know. And he said, hey, thanks a lot, Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. And we go back to the PPAC. And I park the car in the back of where the limos go. And he gets out, and he looks at me. He taps on the passenger side window. I go down. He's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm staying here with the car, He's like, no, forget that. Come in. This is probably, I think it was about 6 hours, maybe 5 hours, maybe 6, maybe I don't remember. It was like daytime. It was a long time before the show would even start. He's like, no, we're gonna be here a while. You're gonna sit in the car by yourself? And he brings me in. He brings me into the theater, and we go hang out in the green room. And I'm there hanging out with George Carlin, his manager, the opening act, and we're just all talking, and just started talking about movies and music and history and, of course, comedy. And I bring up to him, told him my stories of doing the one-man shows in my backyard as a kid, and I told him I do some acting, I do some writing. I always thought about doing stand-up. And he gave me some advice. He said, Nick, you want to do it, you got to hit every open mic night. come up with 5 minutes of material. Hit every open mic night you can, even if they're not. If it's a music one, they'll probably let you do some comedy. And basically, I took that advice and I ran with it. And I went to my very first open mic comedy night about a month later at this place called Stitches. It was at the Providence Place Mall, downtown Providence. And that's when I met the famous Rhode Island legend, John Parada, who was running the open mic. I went, it was a Wednesday night. I went one Wednesday night just to check it out and talk to him, And he's like, told me I got to come back next week. He has me signed up. You're going to bring like 7 people or something like that. I ended up bringing like 20. That's what George Carlin, basically did for me. He just gave me that advice I needed to hear, and I went with it. And, I ended up doing stand-up for close to a decade. I did 10 years. I started out hosting. Parada would hire me for shows, and then I went to a feature act. Maybe by 2 years later, I had like 20 minutes of material, and a couple years after that, I became a headliner. I started headlining shows. But back to the story with George. So the show begins. It's hours later. I actually went and took a ride to Hemingway's, which is still downtown Providence, famous seafood restaurant, really good food. And I went and picked up dinner for us and came back with the food. And we all sat around the table in the green room and had dinner. And it was an amazing night. He was such a great guy. I first got that job at the garage and I saw the name. I was like, George Carlin. I was like, oh man, he's like a miserable dude. Because on stage he just complains about everything, right? But that's just his act. I think it's just him to vent out the truth, the things he sees. But when he's not on stage, he's just like a regular, really cool guy from New York City, New York, and so sweet. I couldn't believe it. I really enjoyed this company. And then the show starts, and Dennis Blair gets up there as the opening act. He does about 20 minutes or so, and he has a guitar. He does songs, funny songs. And I'm right there like 20, 25 feet from the stage, right there at the wing of the stage, watching it all. And out in the audience, it's sold out, packed. And then George Carlin comes out after like a 5-minute intermission. And the place, just the energy, man, the roar of the crowd. And then he started his act, and just the laughter. I could feel that energy just from the wing of the stage. And I'm like, wow, this is like amazing, this feeling. That energy there's like a wave. And I said, I want that. I want to do that right there, what he's doing. And that's why I took that advice. And that month later, I seeked out and found out about that open mic, and I went to do it. And now the funny thing is, right like 2 minutes before he's done with his show, with his act, Jerry, the manager, comes over to me, he taps me on the shoulder and goes, hey, go start the car. He's going to be done in 2 minutes. Like, he knew exactly when he was going to be done, right? I've been with him for years. He knows how long he's going to go. He probably knew what the last bit was going to be. I was like, okay. I run out. I go into the limo. I start the car up. 2 minutes later, Jerry jumps in, Dennis, his girl, and George. He goes, hit it. And we take off, and we head to the private airport at TF Green. And before one person even got up from their seats, we were already halfway to the airport. That's how fast it was. And we get back to the private airport, and now I have the Journal, the Providence Journal, did an article of George Carlin doing the show that night, and there's a nice picture of George in the paper, and I took that picture, and I had it fold up, and I walk them into the airport, and into the lounge of the private airport, and I take this on. I go, George, I have this from the paper. You mind signing this for me? And he grabs it and he rips it up. He goes, forget that thing. He goes, I got something better for you. And he pulls out this glossy, nice picture, like a body shot of him pointing. And he wrote, thanks, Nick. And he signed his name. And he gave it to me. I was like, wow. And so, and if you listen to this on Anchor or Spotify, there's little pictures for each episode of mine. Look at that picture. That's the autograph picture he gave me. So you know I'm not BSing you. And so they jump into the plane. The plane takes off, and it was a great. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how sweet they were to me. And they just treated me like a friend, and hanging out with them and eating with them and just telling stories. And I took that advice like I told you, and did the open mic and did the hosting, and then the feature. I became a headliner, and I just wish, because he passed away about 4 years after that, 2008, and he always came around this area at least once a year, maybe twice a year. And I knew if he lived, I probably would have bumped into him again, and I wanted to tell him, what he did for me. And the closest thing I got to saying anything like thankfulness to anyone was actually through Twitter. I started a conversation with his daughter, Kelly. His daughter Kelly did a one-woman show called, I think it was like Growing Up Carlin or Growing Up with George Carlin or something like that. She did her own one-man show about her life growing up with her father. And I started talking to her, and I told her this whole story, how I met him and hung out with him for hours, and he gave me the advice, and now here I am, a headliner, doing comedy. And she wrote back, she's like, thank you so much, She probably gets, tons of people to talk to all the time, people that were inspired by him or loved him. But she just said, thank you so much for sharing that story with me. So it was great, at least, his only child, his one only daughter, I got to share that story with her. And then maybe, I don't know how many years later, I ended up opening up for Bobby Collins, he's another great comedian. Bobby Collins is a great guy too, class act. And I opened up for Bobby, I don't know how many times, 6, 7 times. And this was, I think, maybe, I did one show with him. It was a bunch of comedians and him headlining. And after that, he liked me, he liked my act, and he gave me a call to open up for him. And we did it at the Hanover Theater up in Worcester, Massachusetts, right? And it was just me. I opened up, so let's just do 10, 15 minutes to warm up the crowd, and then Bobby would come out for an hour and maybe hour and a half. And it was like close to about 2,000 people. And before the show actually happened, and that was like the biggest crowd I ever did at the time. And I felt. Remember I told you about the energy I felt from the P-Pack watching George Carlin show. Just doing 10, 15 minutes set with 2,000 people. That energy of laughter. It's like a wave, man. Your adrenaline is going for days. Like that night, I couldn't even sleep because my adrenaline was pumping so much. But before that show, I was talking to the stage manager at the Hanover Theater, and I told him my George Carlin story, and he loved it. He's just like, oh, that's a great story to, a great memory to have, and he really was excited about it. And he says, come over here with me, and he brings me over to the side wall backstage, and it's this brick wall, and everyone that performed there signed their name on the wall. And he shows me. He goes, right there. He goes, right there. There's George Carlin's name. And everyone signed with this silver Sharpie. He hands over this silver Sharpie to me. And he goes, there's a space right there, right above George's name. Put your name right there. And he let me sign my name right there above George Carlin. I was like, wow, this is like awesome. I mean, hopefully they didn't paint over that wall and it's still there. So, but that was very touching. It was very super nice of this guy to do. I wish I could remember his name. But he was a super nice guy. I think he's been working at the Hanover for years. Maybe he's still there. I'm not sure. So that's my experience. Meeting George Carlin, 2004. That really kicked off everything for me for stand-up, and I really went full blown into stand-up. Kind of stopped doing theater. really wasn't pursuing acting much, and I ended up, performing all over New England. Did a lot of shows with John Parada. Started doing my own shows in my own rooms. Went off to New York a couple of times. Then I went out to Arizona, performed in San Diego, opened up for Chris Reed, Never Kid and Play. He was Chris. Yeah, I think he was Kid. And I opened up for him for a weekend. In Arizona, I'll get to that in the future, my Arizona experience, where I met Tiffany Haddish, who's huge right now. But I opened up for her before she was even, famous nationwide. She was like a touring comic for years, a road comic for years. And I'll tell you that story in the future. But yeah, that kicked off my whole thing with stand up for all those years, and up until 2015, where I got back into theater. I got kind of tired of stand up, and I wanted to go back to my roots. So that's it. That's my George Carlin story, and I met so many other more people doing limo, and then people on movie sets. And my next episode, I'm gonna tell you about Danny DeVito. How about that? Episode 11 next week. I'll tell you about my experience with hanging out with Danny DeVito and his wife, Rita Perlman, his wife at the time, and his kids for 2 days. So, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that story. Take care, everybody. God bless. Ciao. Ciao.